The Edge, where we'll take an in-depth analysis of today's top stories by looking beyond the edge. We'll bring you not just the facts, but also deep insights into the topics with expert opinions and social media reactions. Let's make a start with our look beyond the edge. The United Nations has acquired more than $1.2 billion in an emergency appeal for Afghanistan, while the country's stockpile of basic necessities has been dropping since the withdrawal of foreign troops. Countries like Germany, Norway and the United States have contributed to this appeal. How will these funds be used in Afghanistan, and will any of these payments go to the Taliban? Several scientists from the US Food and Drug Administration and the World Health Organization have said that additional Covid-19 vaccine booster shots are not yet needed for the general population. However, risk-benefit evaluation should consider the number of severe Covid-19 cases that booster shots would be expected to prevent. How important are booster shots for vulnerable people, especially for the prevention from variants? And the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, has named climate change crisis as the single greatest challenge to human rights of our era, adding that the interlinked crises of pollution, climate change and biodiversity act as threat multipliers, amplifying conflicts, tensions and structural inequalities, and forcing people into increasingly vulnerable situations. What steps are needed to prevent a worsening of the situation? These are the top three stories that we'll be taking a look at today from Beyond the Edge. Let's get started. The Taliban has announced its new government, but what we know about it? Let's take a look at this infographic for more details. The United Nations sounded the alarm on Monday over the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan, pledging over $1 billion in a bid to help the country, with half the population in desperate need of aid.
Donors pledged more than $1 billion to help Afghanistan, UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said on Monday, as poverty and hunger have spiralled in the country since the Taliban took power and foreign aid has dried up, raising the spectre of a mass exodus. Guterres said it was impossible to say how much of the money had been promised in response to an emergency UN appeal for $606 million to meet the most pressing needs of a country in crisis.
My appeal to the international community is to find ways to allow for an injection of cash in the Afghan economy, allowing the economy to breathe and avoiding a collapse that would have devastating consequences for the people of Afghanistan and possibly would trigger a massive exodus with the consequences that you can imagine in relation to the stability of the countries of the region.
After decades of war and suffering, Afghans are facing perhaps their most perilous hour, he said in his opening remarks to a donor conference in Geneva. Several speakers in Geneva said donors had a moral obligation to keep helping Afghans after a 20-year engagement.
If we want to protect the human rights of the people of Afghanistan, the best way is to move on with humanitarian aid and engage the Taliban and take profit of that humanitarian aid to push for those rights to be implemented.
Even before the Taliban's seizure of Kabul last month, half the population, or 18 million people, depended on aid. That looks set to increase due to drought and shortages. About a third of the $606 million being sought would be used by the UN World Food Programme, which found that 93% of the 1,600 Afghans it surveyed in August and September were not getting enough to eat. While Afghanistan's banks have started reopening, the queues for withdrawals are endless, and more importantly, no one who depended on the government for a salary, from civil servants to police, has been paid since July.
And discuss the situation further, I'm joined live from Malmö in Sweden by Ruslan Trad, who's a security analyst. Ruslan, thank you for joining us again here today on The Edge.
Good evening.
Now, as we speak in the United States, the Senate Select Committees have already started their investigations into the recriminations of what happened with the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, looking back to the past. Yesterday, the United Nations held an aid conference, which I'd like to speak about in a moment, but that's looking forward. But the situation on the ground in Afghanistan today, what is life for the people in Afghanistan right now?
Well, while discussing the aid and humanitarian assistance for Afghanistan and people, we have three questions immediately arriving at that conference. First of all is that 1 billion is not enough. The second is that what will happen next? Are the Taliban will be the new partners of the West and the international community, or international community and regional powers will find another way to assist Afghan people? And the third is that Afghanistan is still insecure as the clashes in different parts of the country is still continuing and raging. So this is only three of the many questions we should discuss as soon as possible. And as I said, 1 billion is not enough. It is only for the basic things, and I'm pretty sure that the so-called Taliban government is not prepared to distribute this aid or to help assistance and the humanitarian workers on the ground. This is another question, by the way. What will happen with the many groups and humanitarian assistance groups working right now at their risk in Afghanistan?
So as UN Chief Antonio Guterres said yesterday at that conference, Afghanistan is in its most perilous hour at this moment. So what is the aid actually needed for?
Afghanistan is totally destroyed country, not from yesterday, not from the past month. We know that the war in Afghanistan is not even for the past 20 years. Mm-hmm. So the people there need everything. They need, first of all, security, because what will happen with the humanitarian aid if this aid cannot go to the most problematic parts of Afghanistan, including the capital, Kabul. So I'm not sure what Antonio Guterres is saying with that phrase that that is the best way to assist Afghan people and to engage with the Taliban. I don't see any plan in such saying, and this is nonsense. I mean, 1 billion will be not enough even for the basic things. There are parts of the country totally destroyed by the clashes, and this we are not speaking about the huge projects like water, because many people, almost 90% of the population, is is totally needed, the humanitarian assistance.
So that, of course, raises questions about how this aid will be delivered. Now, I know that some countries are suggesting that it should be made available to aid agencies who are already on the ground, and others are worried. One of the comments US Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a little earlier was a reference to the corruption that has been endemic in Afghanistan for many, many, many years. So what's the solution there?
Well, I'm asking myself another questions related to the whole conversation. Who will be the partner of distributing this humanitarian aid, and who will help all workers on the ground? We saw the Russians are willing to somehow participate in reconstruction of Afghanistan. This is some kind of geopolitical competition between Russians and mostly Western powers. But we have also China, we have Turkey. What will happen with if Ankara willing to help with Kabul airport or to distribute aid to the people? So this question have no clear answer, including inside the government of the Taliban. And this is one of the reasons why they are arguing each other, because the Taliban is not a monolithic movement, but they have different views of how the country will be reconstructed, if reconstructed, because people will blame me that I'm very pessimistic on this topic, but I don't believe that the country will be reconstructed anytime soon.
And of course, this inevitably depends on how the government of Afghanistan rolls out. We had promises weeks ago that we would see an inclusive government. When the new Taliban government was rolled out, that wasn't quite what we saw. Everyone's saying that it's all very well to make statements, but we want to see actions. So all of these questions balance on how the government continues over the coming days, weeks and months, and whether or not it does change shape and become somewhat or a little more inclusive.
Well, we have a problem with legitimacy also, because we saw different statements, for example, from Danish government. They totally refused to recognize any Taliban government. We have people in the government of Taliban wanted by dozens of countries. So this is a question the Taliban need to answer before anything they asking from the international community. What will be this government? If we'll see, for example, former officials included in that government, and how they will achieve all questions related to the human rights and women's rights, because we saw videos, very disturbing, by the way, videos of women beating on the streets. So we have the similar problems because the Taliban never changed. They changed only the rhetoric.
They haven't changed in many ways, and this is, of course, the big question: will they change? But is there in all of this, in all of our discussion, there's the question of the reality on the ground. The reality is that the Taliban are in power at this moment. The reality is that the people of Afghanistan do need aid, and somehow that aid needs to be got to them. But also, on the other side, there's the reality that the Taliban have come in showing the old guard, maybe to show a bit of continuity, to gain face, saying, look, we were here and now we're back. Will they have to change to face the reality of the fact that Afghanistan in 2021 isn't the same Afghanistan, or the people's mindsets have changed over the last 20 years? So there's a reality to be faced here from lots of different directions.
Yeah, and the Taliban already feel the heat, because people are not the same after all these years. They achieved maybe basic things, but they achieved something. So they have to lose their lives, their houses, their memories, their families, and the Taliban knew that very well. So if we were in before 20 years, I'm sure the Taliban will start shooting nevertheless children or women or fighters on the street. Now they are very, their steps are insecure and they acting slowly just because the people are different. Maybe the Taliban are not different, but people are. So also we have very strong, for now, resistance, not only militant resistance, but also from the civil society. This kind of civil society was built for the past 20 years. So this is not a small step for these people. And the Taliban are already facing these problems on the streets because people don't like to be pressured by the movement.
Mm-hmm. And again, continuing with this thing, the conflict in Afghanistan isn't, as we've said, isn't just 20 years. It probably isn't just 40 years going back to Soviet times. There have always been tensions in Afghanistan because of the nature of the country, both its geography and also the wide range of ethnicities that have lived there for maybe hundreds of years or throughout its history. Now, from outside, now that all the foreign troops and all the foreign influence has been removed from the country, we've still got the, as you say, Russia and China looking in and trying to put their influence. At the same time, the West, the United States and Europe aren't going to want to lose their influence there. It's very interesting tensions from without the country looking in to try and resolve this. How do you think the international community will be able to move forward now that most of the international players have been removed from the country?
First of all, the international community is divided, not only on Afghanistan, but in general.
Indeed.
We saw that not only in the recent conference about the humanitarian aid and donors. We are seeing that from every news coming recently, from Syria to Yemen to Afghanistan to Central Asia to Africa. International community is totally divided, and the UN is unfortunately participating in very disturbing practices. If we see not only Syria but also Afghanistan, I should remember that the UN is the organization denied to help people evacuating from Afghanistan just before 1 month. So Afghanistan is also under foreign pressure and under foreign influence. Still today, maybe the US forces and the Western forces are out of the country, but we have new players. And we see that different parts of the country are falling small and step by step to another kind of influence. For example, the western part of the country is under Iranian influence right now. Iranians are pushing very strongly their agenda in this part of the country. The northern is mostly of interest by the Russians and the Central Asian alliance of Moscow. So Afghanistan is still under pressure from outside. Don't forget about Pakistan and China and mineral reserves, which are very interested of China economy. So Afghanistan is still a battleground and will continue to be because the government is weak.
And this is the tragedy of the current situation. Russell and Trad, thank you so much for joining us today and giving us your analysis. Let's hope that things settle down and peace returns to the people. Thousands of desperate Afghans wait daily outside Afghanistan's banks for hours to withdraw their weekly $200 allotment. The Taliban government faces enormous economic challenges with near-daily warnings of an impending economic meltdown and humanitarian crisis. We will see which steps were taken by both the Taliban and the international community to stop this humanitarian crisis in the country. And now, let's move to our next topic to shed light on the highly controversial topic of COVID-19 booster shots. Mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations are a highly controversial topic. Our following infographic has more facts about it. Leading scientists from the World Health Organization and the Federal Drug Agency have said that an extra COVID-19 booster shot is not necessary for healthy adults, disagreeing with the US government's plan to begin offering another round of shots to many fully vaccinated Americans.
Additional COVID-19 vaccine booster shots are not needed for the general population. Leading scientists, including 2 departing senior U.S. Food and Drug Administration officials and several from the WHO, said in an article published in a medical journal. The scientists say more evidence is needed to justify boosters. That view disagrees with U.S. government plans to begin offering another round of shots to many fully vaccinated Americans as soon as next week. As COVID-19 cases caused by the Delta variant rise, President Joe Biden's administration is concerned that infections among those already vaccinated are a sign that their protection is waning and has pushed boosters as a way to rebuild immunity. The WHO has argued that the vaccines are still needed for the first dose around the globe. Some countries have begun COVID-19 booster campaigns, including Israel, providing some of the data on which the Biden administration has made its case for additional shots. They say broader use of boosters may be needed in the future if there is waning immunity to the primary vaccination or if new variants evolve so that the vaccine no longer protects against it. A panel of experts that advises the FDA on vaccines plans to meet on September the 17th to discuss additional doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech shot, the first step in a wider booster rollout.
And joining me live from Rabat in Morocco is Dr. Azzeddine Ibrahimi, who's director of the BioNova Research Centre. Dr. Ibrahimi, thank you so much for joining me today here on The Edge. Delightful to see you again after so long. The news today that booster shots are not wholly recommended by the US FDA or the World Health Organization maybe shouldn't come as a surprise to us. But what is the current thinking on people taking booster shots, and why is it a good idea, or why is it not such a good idea?
Well, Andy, thank you very much for having me on the show, and I think it's nice to come back time to time just to make the point on different issues. And here it's very interesting issues. We have to come back just to talk about the facts. The paper in the Lancet actually, and it's written by 2 experts that are departing the FDA. It's clear. It's not talking about not vaccinating or not giving booster shots to elderlies and frontliners. No, they are talking about giving a booster shots to everybody of the general public. And that's where the discussion should be, right. Not about giving boosters actually to the immunocompromised person, the elderlies, or people with chronic diseases. I think there is no discussion around the world that these guys should get the shots. You can actually look at it from different angles, actually. When you look at it from the clinician point of view, you could say, you know, I want just to have a really safe measures to have fully vaccinated people, since we don't know if the vaccine will be waning or not. You can look at it from the managing perspective as, for example, the WHO, and they are saying simply, we don't need to give this shot to these people because we didn't even vaccinated persons around the world with one shot. And they give this horrific number, actually. If you take out Morocco from the numbers of Africa, 99% of the Africans didn't get one dose. And I'm just really, I have to emphasize that, one dose of the vaccines. And they are saying, if we are not doing, when we are not vaccinating this population, what's going to happen? It's really that we can not fight the pandemic, and the pandemic will be here. And they are saying also, the WHO and these two experts, actually, that people, the general public, with 2 shots, they don't need another shot of the booster. And instead of that, will be more beneficial, actually, to vaccinate other population that didn't get in a shot.
It's all about balances, isn't it? And I'm glad that you brought up those statistics. I was looking at, there's a website, Our World in Data, and just before we came on, I was looking at their statistics, and it's truly shocking to look at. I printed off a little graph here. I should have given our producers it to show everybody. But some countries are almost fully vaccinated, like the United Arab Emirates. At least 89% of people have had at least one shot. And then you come back and nearly all of the African countries are, as you say, less than 1%. And it's even the whole of Africa, if I can find it quickly just here, well, South Africa, 18%. For the whole of that part of the continent. Truly shocking statistics when in places like parts of the US we're seeing doses not being used. Now this is really the issue, isn't it? That the doses, the vaccines aren't being equitably shared. That's the main issue.
Well, that's you bring me to the third angle, actually. As you and me, we are citizens of the world, actually, and we feel the pain of other people. I think we cannot come out of this pandemic without vaccinating the whole population of the world, or a certain percentage, actually. If we not, we'll come back to square one, and we'll come back, this decision that we are making right now will haunt us, actually. And I'll give you an example so people will understand. South Africa is a very important area to vaccinate for one reason. You have a lot of immunocompromised people that get AIDS, actually. And what's happened for most of these people, if they get the virus, most likely if they don't die by the first days, they will get the virus inside them and they will multiply the virus for many weeks and months. And what's happened at the end, and we have this example that came back just a few weeks ago, we have this new variant that is C12, and C12 seems to escape any immunization, escape any response to immunization. And that will be actually bringing us to square one, and actually we'll have to fight again the pandemic. So I think coming back to these countries, and we can give the example of the US, and it's true, Andy, we have to look at their situation. I think they have lots of problems, actually, because more than 30% of the population will not be vaccinated for one reason. They are anti-vaxxers by culture. They are not changing their mind right now. They were for many years, for generations sometimes, against being vaccinated. So you have this 30% will not be vaccinated. And it will be really a pity that you keep this 30% of the vaccines for 2 doses in the US, and you have countries like you said in Africa didn't get any dose. So it brings me to this feeling and unfairness and this moral issue, actually, more than scientific one.
At the same time, we've got good news that more vaccines are being developed, and other therapies, I believe, are being developed to treat coronavirus. Now, this of course, is natural because as time progresses, we learn more. What does this tell us about how the battle to end the pandemic can be brought, can be foreshortened? Does that bring us hope?
I mean, there is a lot of hope. I have just to remind everybody that the approaches to fight any pandemic is three approaches that you can have. You have the vaccine that everybody knows about. The other thing is therapies. And we have a couple of protocols that are working, but actually we don't have a specific drug that will fight the COVID. And I think there is numbers of drugs coming out and they will be here soon and it will help. Waiting for that, most of the population will have to go through this lockdown. They can go through what we are trying to educate people actually to put masks and actually distanciation. That's something very interesting that we have to keep in mind. Waiting for the specific drug, the vaccination is the only issue actually. And you can see that countries that can actually survive and declare actually and announce that the COVID, it's really as just a normal disease like Denmark, Great Britain and Singapore, for example, simply they get to the percentage of vaccination. Over 65–70% of the vaccination, you have no risk for now actually on your health systems. You can manage any specific breakdown of the virus. But lower than that, all this health system, they are really under stress if there is a new pandemic. And why I think...
So that's why we've got to keep the numbers up. Azadine, my team's been working very hard whilst we've been talking. They found the graphic which I was just showing you. So let's just have a look at that, if we can have that on the screen. So this is just a sample of countries from around the world, and it's showing the huge disparity that we've got from different countries. The dark colour showing the people who have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19, and the lighter green those that just had one dose. This is truly astonishing. In the West, we're feeling very comfortable because our vaccine numbers are up around 60–70% and above. As you say, this takes the strain off the medical services. But then looking at some of the countries lower down the map, what's your reaction to that?
Well, actually, part of it I'm ashamed actually, because when I see that the word percentage is 42%, and you have in Africa, we didn't get to 2% actually. I mean, I feel ashamed. Why? Because as an African, that we couldn't manage actually this COVID-19 better, that we don't have our own vaccines. I'm forgetting that I'm Moroccan, I'm talking just as an African, because I think that we should have, and we have all the potential to have all of that. The other thing, I hope, but I think if there is a new variant come from Africa, I'm sure that you will invite me again, and I will tell you that I told you that we need to vaccinate these countries. And I think that I hope that we'll not get there. I think, to be fair, I think if you have vaccines and get to a certain percentage, please don't go further than that. If you not need to have a third shot, a booster shot, don't do it. If you don't need to go to lower than 12 years old children and vaccinate them, please get these shots and send them to other countries, because we can succeed in managing the crisis locally. But to come out of the pandemic, it should have and should be actually all the work together coming out of it.
I think that message is truly the one which people need to hear. We need the vaccinations, but we need the whole world to be vaccinated to prevent variants from kick-starting this all over again. Dr. Azadine Ibrahimi, thank you so much for joining us again here today on Edge. Pleasure speaking with you. So some countries have begun their COVID-19 booster campaigns as scientific articles acknowledge that some individuals, such as those who are immunocompromised, could benefit from an additional dose. The coming weeks will show how countries will decide on the booster shots. For now, let's move on to our final topic to discuss the deteriorating climate crisis. Climate change and environmental disasters are global problems, and the whole world suffers from their impacts. Our infographic explains what you need to know. United Nations said on Monday that climate change and pollution are severely affecting human rights, with countries across the globe failing to take the necessary action.
The UN Rights Chief on Monday said that the triple planetary crises of climate change, pollution and nature loss represented the single biggest threat to human rights globally.
The interlinked crises of pollution, climate change and biodiversity act as threats multipliers, amplifying conflicts, tensions and structural inequalities and forcing people into increasingly vulnerable situations. As these environmental threats intensify, they will constitute the single greatest challenge to human rights in our era. All this is now painfully clear. The greatest uncertainty about this challenge is what policymakers will do about them.
The UN Rights Chief cited murderous climate events, including the fires in Siberia and California and floods in China, Germany and Turkey. Bachelet warned several droughts could additionally force millions into misery, hunger and displacement.
Through the 2030 Agenda, the Paris Agreement and other instruments, states have united behind a transformative vision for people-centered sustainable development. Yet many have consistently failed to fund and implement it. We must set the bar higher. Indeed, our common future depends on it.
Environmental damage usually mostly hurts those who are least protected, the poorest and most marginalised, and the poorest nations, which often have the least capacity to respond. We hope that developed countries will lead the way and bring a stop to the climate crisis. So, our analysts have provided their insights on today's top stories. Let's have a roundup of what they had to say. Before closing our programme, let's take a look at social media to hear your voices and reactions on today's top story, shared with the hashtag Climate Crisis. Climate change is real. Let's have a look at what you have to say about it on Twitter. Climate Change Agenda says climate change is real, an area we, the youth, must begin to put a lot of energy. It's our future. We must own it. Today is assured, but not tomorrow if we don't tackle the issue of climate change now. And Sheng Li says, meanwhile, they're procrastinating, doing nothing about climate crisis, and fossil fuel industry are still polluting and thriving with impunity. Millions have begun to suffer the consequences, and unfortunately it can get worse because the climate breakdown has just started. And Rudy Riet says, We don't have time to kick the can of radical behavioural change to try and slow the climate crisis. Real leaders need to step to the fore and take charge here. The planet, as a flailing space rock, will survive, but will we? Not without truly monumental changes in how we do things. And let's now take a look at our video of the day, which shows that the climate crisis can force 216 million people to migrate within their own countries by 2050.
Climate change is increasingly driving migration. Climate change can compel 216 million people around the world to move within their countries by 2050. People will migrate because of water scarcity, declining crop productivity, and sea level rise. But with collective action on climate and development now, internal climate migration could be reduced by as much as 80%. Countries must take action on 4 key building blocks. Cut greenhouse gas emissions to lessen the climate pressures that drive people to migrate. Embed climate migration in far-sighted, green, resilient, and inclusive development planning. Invest in understanding the drivers of climate migration to inform well-targeted policies. And plan for each phase of migration so people can adapt and improve their living conditions.
And that's all for this episode of The Edge with me, Andy BOYNS. Stay tuned. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth analysis on the top stories and a look beyond the edge.